If you drive a car, if you heat your home with gas, if you buy groceries at the supermarket, if you take prescription medication, if you order anything online that ships from overseas, what just happened 6,000 miles away in the Middle East is about to hit your wallet. And it may already be happening. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, not threatened, not at risk. Closed. And what happens next could reshape the American economy and every economy on Earth for months or even years to come. On March 2nd, 2026, a senior commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps went on state television and said 7 words that sent shockwaves through every energy market on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. If anyone tries to pass, we will set those ships ablaze. That was not a bluff. That was not posturing. Tankers are burning right now. Within hours of that announcement, every major shipping company on Earth hit the brakes. Maersk, the biggest shipping company in the world, suspended all vessel crossings through the strait until further notice. Hapag-Lloyd followed, then CMA CGM, then MSC, then COSCO, then Emirates Sky Cargo. One after another, the arteries of global trade slammed shut. Not reduced capacity, not limited service. Full suspension. Over 150 ships are now anchored outside the waterway. Engines idling, cargo sitting, crews waiting for a signal that may not come for days, or weeks, or longer. But here's what most people don't understand about this strait. And here's why what's happening right now matters to every single American, whether you've ever heard of the Strait of Hormuz or not. Let me paint the picture. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, curving band of water squeezed between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its tightest point, the strait is just 21 miles wide. But the actual shipping lane, the corridor where supertankers loaded with millions of barrels of crude oil navigate every day, is only about 2 miles across in each direction. 2 miles. That's roughly the distance from one end of a suburban shopping mall to the other. And through that impossibly thin corridor, roughly 20 million barrels of oil move every single day. To put that in perspective, that's 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply. $500 billion in annual energy trade. All of it funneled through a gap you could see across with a pair of binoculars on a clear day. And right now, that gap is effectively sealed. The chief economist at Rystad Energy, one of the world's leading energy research firms, described it this way: "We have not seen anything like this in pretty much the history of the Strait of Hormuz." He compared it to blocking the aorta in a circulatory system. And if you understand what happens when the aorta gets blocked, you understand why the entire world is watching this right now. To understand how we got here, you have to rewind 4 days to February 28, 2026. That's when the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military operation against Iran, codenamed Operation Epic Fury. The strikes were not limited or surgical. They targeted military facilities, nuclear sites, missile launch platforms, and senior leadership. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in the operation, along with other top officials. This was not a warning shot. This was a decapitation strike. Iran's response came within hours. Missiles rained down on Israeli cities. U.S. military bases in the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain were hit. Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, launched rockets into Israel, prompting Israeli counterstrikes. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura oil refinery, one of the largest in the world, came under drone attack. Qatar's liquefied natural gas facilities at Ras Laffan Industrial City and Mesaid Industrial City were struck by Iranian drones, forcing the country to halt all LNG production. Qatar, one of the largest natural gas suppliers on the planet, shut down, just like that. And then came the move that nobody, not the Pentagon, not Wall Street, not the world's energy analysts, was fully prepared for. The Revolutionary Guard broadcast a message on VHF Channel 16. That's the International Maritime Distress Frequency. Every commercial ship, every tanker, every cargo vessel within range heard it. The message was simple: no vessel is allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, here's a critical detail that changes everything about how this is playing out. Technically, Iran did not issue a formal legal blockade. There's no official notice filed with international maritime authorities. The Strait, on paper, remains open. But here's the part nobody is prepared for. It doesn't matter. Because the insurance industry did what Iran's navy couldn't. Within 48 hours of the first strikes, major marine insurers, including Guard, Skuld, and the London P&I Club, formally canceled war risk coverage for the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Protection and indemnity insurance was pulled effective March 5th. That single decision, made not by generals or presidents but by underwriters in London, made it financially impossible for any ship owner to justify sending a tanker through. Think about that. No insurance company will touch you, no captain will sail, no cargo will move. Iran didn't need a single warship to block the strait. They just needed to make it too dangerous for insurance companies to cover. War risk premiums had already tripled in the days before the strikes, jumping from 0.125% to between 0.2% and 0.4% of the entire ship's insured value per transit. For a very large crude carrier, a supertanker, that's an extra $250,000 just to make one crossing. And then the coverage disappeared entirely. No insurance means no transit. Period. By the night of March 1st and into March 2nd, ship tracking data showed 0 tankers broadcasting automatic identification signals in the strait. Not a trickle. Not reduced traffic. 0. The strait went dark. And here's where it gets even more alarming. This isn't just about threats. This is kinetic. Ships are being hit. At least 5 tankers have been damaged since the conflict began. 2 crew members have been killed. 1 tanker off the coast of Oman was struck by Iranian drones and set ablaze. The ATHE Nova, a tanker allegedly linked to American allies, was hit by 2 drones and continued burning. The Joint Maritime Information Center, the multinational body that monitors maritime security, upgraded its risk assessment for the region to critical. That's the highest level. It means an attack is almost certain. Now here's where this story stops being about a waterway in the Middle East and starts being about your life, your gas station, your grocery store, your heating bill, your medicine cabinet. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't just carry oil, it carries 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas. Natural gas is what heats tens of millions of American homes. It's what powers a significant chunk of US electricity generation. And while America produces most of its own natural gas, the global market doesn't work in isolation. When European natural gas prices surge more than 20% overnight, as they just did, and when Asian LNG prices spike nearly 40%, as they just did, those shockwaves reach American energy markets. They always do. But it goes beyond energy. 1/3 of the world's fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Fertilizer. The stuff that makes food grow. If fertilizer prices spike, farming costs spike. If farming costs spike, food costs spike. And those costs land directly on the shelf at your local supermarket. We saw this exact chain reaction during the Ukraine crisis in 2022, when fertilizer disruptions contributed to food price inflation across the globe. This time, the volumes at stake are larger. 30% of Europe's jet fuel supply originates from or transits through this strait. That means transatlantic flights get more expensive. That means air freight costs rise. That means anything that moves by plane, which includes a surprising amount of pharmaceuticals, fresh produce, and electronics components, costs more to ship. And those costs always get passed to the consumer. The strait is also a key route for aluminum, sugar, petrochemical feedstocks, and consumer electronics components. Shipping a 40-foot container from Shanghai to Europe now costs 3 times what it did before Operation Epic Fury. Those price increases are not absorbed by companies. They are passed straight to consumers, fueling inflation in everything from car parts to household appliances. Industries like automotive manufacturing could face production slowdowns or outright halts as components stranded in the Gulf fail to arrive. Medical supplies and temperature-controlled goods are at risk the longer this drags on. EV batteries and semiconductor components for 2026 production are stranded in the Gulf right now with no way out. Now let's talk numbers, because the numbers are what make this terrifying. Brent crude, the global oil benchmark, surged up to 13%, climbing above $82 a barrel. That's the biggest single-day gain since mid-2025. Diesel futures settled at their highest level in nearly 3 years. Analysts at Goldman Sachs and Barclays are warning that if this disruption continues, oil could blow past $100 a barrel. Some are going further. One analyst at MST Marquee said this could present a scenario 3 times the severity of the Arab oil embargo and Iranian revolution of the 1970s. Triple digits for oil. LNG prices retesting the record highs of 2022. That's not a fringe prediction. That's a mainstream Wall Street risk assessment. GasBuddy analysts estimate that American gasoline prices will rise 10 to 30 cents per gallon in the coming days, with some individual gas stations seeing price jumps of up to 85 cents. And that's the optimistic scenario. That's if this gets resolved quickly. But what if it doesn't? Here's what they're not saying publicly. America is not immune to this, not even close. Yes, the United States is now a net petroleum exporter. Yes, domestic production is at historic highs. But oil is a global, fungible commodity. That means a disruption anywhere affects prices everywhere. When 20% of global supply vanishes from the market overnight, every barrel on Earth gets repriced. Every single one. An energy analyst at the Center for Strategic and International Relations put it simply. A loss of Iranian barrels would cause China to bid for substitute supplies. And when China starts bidding aggressively for oil that would otherwise go to other markets, prices rise for everyone, including Americans. And the US is not just affected through oil prices. The United States is now the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. Higher global LNG prices boost the revenues of American gas exporters, but they also contribute to rising electricity costs at home. When international buyers are willing to pay a premium for American LNG, that LNG gets shipped overseas instead of staying in the domestic market. Supply drops. Prices at home rise. Your electricity bill goes up. Now let's put this in historical context, because what's happening right now is unprecedented. And I mean that literally. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, both sides attacked commercial shipping in what became known as the Tanker War. Over 8 years, 411 ships were attacked. 239 of those were petroleum tankers. More than 100 sailors were killed. Over 30 million tons of cargo was damaged. It was the most sustained attack on merchant shipping since World War II. But here's the critical difference. Even during the Tanker War, the Strait of Hormuz was never fully closed. Iran threatened to close it. Iraq provoked Iran, hoping it would close it. But the strait stayed open. Shipping continued, albeit at higher risk and higher cost. The 1980s Tanker War led to an initial 25% drop in shipping traffic, but oil continued to flow. What is happening right now is different. This is the first time in the modern history of the Strait that tanker traffic has dropped to effectively zero. Not 25% less, not 50% less, zero. We are in uncharted territory. Even during last year's 12-day war between the US, Israel, and Iran in June 2025, the Strait was disrupted but not shut down. Oil prices spiked briefly to around $80 a barrel and then quickly stabilized. The Strait of Hormuz avoided mass disruptions despite initial fears. Analysts at Rystad Energy said this time is fundamentally different. The scale of Iran's retaliation has been a big surprise. Now let's talk about the chess pieces still in play. Because this crisis is not static. It's evolving by the hour. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve currently holds about 415 million barrels of oil. That's stored in massive underground salt caverns along the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. It sounds like a lot, but the reserve is only 58% full. It was drained by 180 million barrels under the Biden administration during the 2022 Russia-Ukraine crisis, the largest release in the reserve's history. The Trump administration has been working to refill it, but as of today, there are no plans to tap the reserve. A U.S. source confirmed the administration is not currently discussing a release. The White House says they're monitoring the situation. But here's the math that should worry everyone. The reserve can pump out a maximum of about 4.4 million barrels per day. The Strait normally handles 20 million barrels per day. Even if the U.S. opened the taps fully, it would replace less than a quarter of the missing supply. And even the combined emergency reserves of the entire International Energy Agency may not be enough. Clearview Energy Partners warned in a note this week that a full-on crisis in the Strait of Hormuz could outstrip global emergency oil supplies. There are alternative routes. Sort of. Saudi Arabia has the East-West pipeline, also known as the Petroline, nearly 750 miles long, that can move oil from the Gulf to Red Sea ports. The UAE has the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, about 400 miles long, that reaches the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the strait entirely. But experts are blunt. These pipelines can handle a small fraction, of the volume that normally flows through Hormuz. There are no meaningful alternatives to that flow. Ships are rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. The same detour we saw during the Red Sea disruptions, but this time the volumes are exponentially larger. Rerouting around Africa adds roughly 3,500 nautical miles and approximately 10 to 14 additional days to transit times for vessels moving between Asia and Europe or the Americas. Each rerouted voyage costs an extra $1 million in fuel alone. Those costs will be passed to consumers. They always are. Assembly plants in Germany, the UK, the US, and Mexico will begin to feel the effects of delayed Asian component shipments within 2 to 3 weeks of sustained closure. Buffer inventories, already thinned by years of just-in-time manufacturing and post-pandemic supply chain reform, are not sized for 2 extra weeks of transit time. The bullwhip effect is already forming. Delays creating shortages, shortages creating panic buying creating worse shortages. We have seen this movie before, in 2021, in 2022, and now potentially in 2026. And then there's the domino effect that nobody wants to talk about. Iraq, one of OPEC's largest producers, exports almost all of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. If the closure persists, Iraq may have to shut in production entirely, which means stopping oil extraction from its fields because there's literally nowhere to send it. Iraqi oil officials told Reuters this week that production cuts have already reached nearly 1.5 million barrels per day, and those cuts could widen to more than 3 million barrels per day within days as the country runs out of storage capacity. Think about that. Iraq is not at war. Iraq was not attacked. But because the strait is closed, Iraq's entire oil economy is grinding to a halt. That's what a choke point does. It doesn't just affect the countries fighting, it affects everyone who depends on the passage. Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. All of them export through this same strait. Their oil, their gas, their revenues, all of it is trapped behind a 21-mile-wide door that is now effectively locked. OPEC Plus has pledged to increase output by 206,000 barrels per day to compensate. But let's be honest about the math. 206,000 barrels per day is a rounding error against the 15 to 20 million barrels per day that normally flow through the strait. It's a bandage on a severed artery. An energy analyst at Rapidan Energy Group warned bluntly, "A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession." Another analyst at Neuberger Berman said a partial slowdown lasting a week or two could be absorbed. But a full or near-full closure lasting a month or more would push crude oil well into triple digits and push European natural gas prices toward or above the crisis levels of 2022. The director of the Iran project at the International Crisis Group laid it out. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz would disrupt roughly a fifth of globally traded oil overnight. And prices would not just spike, they would gap violently upward on fear alone. The shock would reverberate far beyond energy markets, tightening financial conditions, fueling inflation and pushing fragile economies closer to recession in a matter of weeks. Now here's the wild card. President Trump announced today that the United States will offer government-backed insurance for ships transiting the Gulf, and the U.S. Navy will begin escorting oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz if necessary. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed a program to mitigate energy costs will begin Tuesday. That is an extraordinary step. The U.S. government is essentially stepping in to replace the entire private insurance market to force the Strait back open. It's a move that echoes Operation Earnest Will in 1987, when the U.S. Navy escorted reflagged Kuwaiti tankers through the Gulf during the original tanker war. But Bloomberg analysts are warning that the Pentagon doesn't have weeks to accomplish this. It has days. Because every day the Strait stays closed, the economic damage compounds. Iran knows this, and that's what makes this a weapon. Iran didn't need to mine the Strait. They didn't need to sink a carrier. They needed to make the waterway too dangerous for commercial traffic. Selective drone and rocket attacks on a handful of tankers. A few threats on the right radio frequency. And the insurance market did the rest. The cost to Iran was minimal. The cost to the global economy is staggering. So where does this leave us? Let's pull back and look at the full picture. China, the world's largest crude oil importer, gets roughly 40% of its oil through the Strait. India gets 60% of its oil from the Middle East. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Taiwan, all of them are staring at the same choke point. All of them scrambling for alternatives that barely exist. Pakistan gets 99% of its LNG from Qatar and the UAE. Bangladesh gets 72%. India gets 53%. These countries are not just exposed, they're vulnerable in a way that could cause rolling blackouts, industrial shutdowns, and social instability within weeks. And the nitrogen fertilizer that transits through the Strait is critical for Northern Hemisphere spring planting. If that supply is disrupted for more than a few weeks, the downstream effects hit crop yields in late 2026, which means food price spikes heading into 2027. The food chain is long, but it starts in a shipping lane that is 2 miles wide. So the question is no longer whether this will affect America. It already is. Gas prices are rising. Energy markets are rattled. Supply chain delays are beginning. The question now is how long it lasts. Because if this is resolved in days, markets stabilize. Tankers resume, prices retreat. The world exhales and calls it a close call. But if it stretches into weeks, we are looking at a cascade. Triple-digit oil. Gasoline prices climbing past $5 a gallon. Inflation surging at the worst possible time. Supply chains fracturing across industries from automotive to pharmaceuticals. Natural gas prices squeezing home heating and electricity bills. Food prices spiking as fertilizer costs explode. Manufacturing halting as components fail to arrive. And a global economy that was already fragile tipping towards something that economists have not seen since the 1970s. The Strait is 21 miles wide. The shipping lane is 2 miles across. And right now, the entire world economy, your economy, is holding its breath, waiting to see if those 2 miles reopen, or if the damage has only just begun.